Hello, let's take a look at the novel Sense of an Ending by Julian Barnes. So, The Sense of an Ending, published in 2011, is a novel by the British novelist Julian Barnes. It won the Booker Prize in 2011, October 2011 to be specific. The novel is divided into two parts and consists of the narrations of Tony Webster, who muses about his past and comes to terms with his contradictory selves. So the novel traces the trajectory of Tony's life and his interactions with various people. And as the novel is narrated by Tony, the reader is offered only his perspective, and later revelations suggest that his narration is far from objective. So coming to the relevance of the title of the book is taken from Frank Kermode's famous critical work, The Sense of an Ending, Studies in the Theory of Fiction. So the novel questions the possibility of complete closure. The question is raised whether we can ever make sense of an ending. And just as historical narratives, the narratives of life are also ambiguous. And you can even say that we cannot have a proper ending, but only an abstract sense that hints at an ending that might probably never be concrete. So coming to the characters in the novel, these are the major characters: Tony Webster, Adrian Finn, Veronica Ford, Margaret, Jack Ford, and Susan Ford. Let's look at Tony Webster's character in detail. He is the protagonist and narrator of the novel. He depicts himself as a peaceable man, somebody who doesn't want to ruffle any feathers. And as the novel opens, Tony is a retired man thinking back about his earlier life. He tries to present himself in a certain manner as a person who's easygoing and not serious at all. However, later revelations suggest that Tony himself doesn't realize his negative character traits. And the second part of the novel slowly unravels his maliciousness and casual cruelty as a youth. He comes to terms with these traits as he feels remorse for his past actions. The novel projects Tony in a very neutral manner and does not condemn his actions because these are all actions that are perhaps very ordinary in every average individual. Next, we have the character of Adrian Finn, who is presented as a highly intelligent boy who is earnest in all his opinions. He is obsessed with existential ideas and tries to arrive at a feasible conclusion. He remains a mystery as he keeps himself at a certain distance. And Adrian never discloses the details of his personal life to any of his friends. And his death is, again, something as mysterious as his life. And it is only towards the end of the novel that Tony grasps the outline of events that might have led to Adrian's suicide. But even then, Adrian's narrative remains a secret as Veronica burns his diary and the reader never really understands his true motives. Next, we have the character of Veronica Ford, who is depicted as a sophisticated and cultured girl who becomes Tony's girlfriend when he joins Bristol. He considers her to be a manipulative and deceptive person and is deeply hurt by her relationship with Adrian. But in the second part of the narrative, the reader understands that Tony's narrative is tilted in his favor. Veronica is often abrupt with Tony, and these reactions stem out of her pain at his inability to understand the tragedy in her life. And we can also say that she's perhaps the only character who takes responsibility for the actions of others. And this trait is unique because none of the other characters manage to do it. Then we have the character of Margaret, who is Tony's wife. And as the novel opens, you understand that they're divorced, but they still remain on friendly terms. She had left him for another man who in turn dumped her for a younger woman. In Tony's perspective, they are now friends and share a platonic relationship. Though Margaret suggests that they get back together, Tony believes that she might not be really serious. However, the reader gets the idea that Margaret is still in love with Tony and feels quite strongly about him. There are subtle hints that suggest that Tony is unable to love Margaret the way she wants him to love her. Then we have Jack Ford, who is Veronica's brother. Tony feels that Jack treats him in a mockingly condescending manner. Tony feels rather unsure around the Ford men, both the father and the son, as he feels that they look down upon him. Jack is presented as someone who's never serious and remains casual and flippant in his attitude. He's almost like Tony in his inability to be serious, and this is something that Adrian finds fault with. The reader can never be sure whether Jack is being contemptuous or not because Tony's reactions can be viewed from the perspective of a severe inferiority complex. And now we come to Susan Ford, who is the most enigmatic character in the novel. She seems to resent her daughter for some reason. Tony thinks of her as a carefree woman and chooses to believe her when she warns him against Veronica by suggesting that her daughter is damaged. She has a child by her daughter's boyfriend, and the reader never comes to know of her true intentions. Again, her reasons for sending Tony the money and the documents are also never revealed. Maybe she wanted him to know the truth and take responsibility for his actions, or maybe she was just a frustrated woman who wanted to wreak havoc on all around her. So those were the major characters, and now we come to the major themes in the novel. Okay, the first theme is probably memory and manipulation. Then we have another theme, personal narratives and the extent of its objectivity, which is closely followed by the question of responsibility and self-deception. And finally, how imperfect history is and how uncertain narratives can be. Coming to memory and manipulation. In the novel, memory plays a significant role as most of the incidents are narrated from Tony's memory of how it happened. The unsuspecting reader is caught by absolute surprise when Tony's memories are revealed to be inaccurate. Tony himself is astounded to reread his letter to Adrian because it was not at all like he remembered. The manipulative nature of memory becomes crucial as the reader realizes that Tony is not as objective as he thought he was. In his memory, he was the victim, but his memories might have been manipulated by his unconscious self to validate his stance. It's all about him. Generally, memories are touted to be a record of the past. But what if one's memories are unknowingly molded to suit one's perspective? It is not really clear whether Tony suppresses his memories unknowingly or willingly deceives himself. But there are enough clues within the text that suggest that Tony is aware of how deceptive memories can be. Moving on to the next theme, personal narratives and the extent of its objectivity. Personal narratives are decidedly subjective, no doubt about it, but people often use them to cite their version of what happened. The novel projects how personal narratives can create a narrative tension that arises out of these conflicting versions. Tony believes that his version of the story is right and leads the reader along the same path. However, the second part of the novel reveals information that makes Tony question his own narrative. With the subjective impressions that he had made, he assumed certain opinions that in course of time evolved to be his truths. And towards the end of the narrative, Tony realizes that these truths have to be discarded. But when he mistakes the young man seen in the novel to be Adrian's son with Veronica, he's yet again making the same mistake. And Veronica gets extremely frustrated and she says, you still don't get it, that he still doesn't get the truth. And when he realizes that Adrian had a child with Mrs. Ford, Veronica's mother, Tony realizes that his personal narrative has led him astray yet again. The novel raises a very valid question about the issue of responsibility, about the notion of responsibility. How does one assign responsibility? This is a question that the novel addresses at various levels. And the novel raises several questions. Who is responsible for Adrian's suicide? Who is responsible for Veronica's misery? Who is responsible for the Ford family tragedy? These are innumerable questions that rise to the surface as the novel progresses. And the questions are never answered fully. Johnny, who thought that he was just an objective spectator in the entire drama, finds out that he is perhaps more responsible than anybody else. Adrian, Johnny, and Mrs. Susan Ford are characters who glide away from the dubious mantle of responsibility. And in contrast, Veronica is the only character who's willing to be responsible for the actions of others. Though her stepbrother's existence must have been a source of sorrow and anguish, she does not step away from him. The narrative offers no easy remedy for the dilemma of responsibility. Tony admits that he does not know the extent of his responsibility, and this uncertainty is characterized by the growing sense of unease that he feels. The issue of responsibility is reflected right from the beginning of the narrative when the boys and their history teacher, Tony and his friends and their history teacher, muse about individual and collective responsibility. While it is impossible to recreate the correct chain of responsibility, the narrative argues that it is also dangerous to deny the implications of individual actions. Our next theme is self-deception. Sense of an Ending raises pertinent questions regarding the extent to which people are willing to deceive themselves. Tony lives his entire life believing that he is not hurting anybody and that his peaceable nature will avoid all conflicts from his path. In his interactions with Margaret and Susie, who is his daughter with Margaret, he believes that he has done the right thing by keeping things mellow. Yet, the reader gets ample clues to understand that Tony has inflicted more emotional damage than he will ever admit. His interactions with Veronica are even more intense, and all the emotional trauma is hinted at only towards the end of the narrative. The novel does not depict Tony as a horrible person, as most people go through repeated acts of self-deception to sustain their own personal narratives that project them in a favorable light. And so we come to our last theme, imperfect history and uncertain narratives. You see that in the novel, Tony and his friends, they debate on the nature of history. And during the course of this discussion, Adrian points out that history is never perfect and that one can never arrive at an infallible and accurate narrative. The group discusses this idea in the history class when they talk about the suicide of a fellow student. This idea is later developed in the narrative when Tony's accepted story of the past is uprooted by versions that his memory may have suppressed. And even when certain crucial events are unearthed, the picture is never complete, as Tony realizes that it is impossible to construct a complete picture. Adrian's version of the truth will never be heard as he's dead. His testimony in the form of the diary is not disclosed to Tony or the reader. And even if one manages to find the diary, it is only Adrian's version and never the complete picture. So one can say that history, be it be personal or universal, never attains finality as it is constructed of uncertain narratives. So that's all for now. Thank you.